give it like 30 seconds before it gets up there.
Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you once again for joining us for our Senior Fraud Task Force meeting. And I am very excited for today's meeting. We have some great guest speakers, including Melanie Lambert from the Choices State Director from the Department of Aging and Disability Services. And I want to give a special thanks to Laura Stauning for that referral, and we're very excited to have her today. And we're going to try something a little bit new today, where we're going to take a break at around 10:55 for a brief pause before we bring in our second panelist, the Probate Court Administrator, Judge Beverly Streit-Kefalis, who will be joining us a little bit later on. She has a meeting that she's doing, but she's going to join us for the second half of the program. And she's also known as Judge Beverly, so that's okay for folks who would like to refer to her as that. And I want to thank Jim Politis from the Probate Court for helping us to coordinate that. And in the last week, there has been a lot of movement since our last meeting, and including the publication and approval of the 2022 Long-Term Supports and Services Report of the state, which is the next 3-year plan, which makes a number of recommendations to help guide the state of Connecticut as it moves forward. And including in those recommendations, which have been kind of made to be inclusive of the pandemic and some of the highlights that we can kind of anticipate going forward through the legislative session. But some of the priorities that have been recently listed kind of coincide with some of the stuff we've talked about earlier, including workforce development, reaching out to boards of education, helping to make sure that we have the needed hands on deck, backup planning for those who are self-directing their care, visitation policies, and including expanding the Ombudsman role to cover qualified Medicaid beneficiaries wherever they are, with the focus on choice. One of the interesting data points that came out is that Connecticut is now 70% of its recipients are now home-based, with 30% who are in institutions, and that's a big increase from back in 2003, where I believe it was about 46%. And just so we have some hard numbers too, the monthly average is about 31,276 of our recipients doing care at home-based, and 13,663 in institutions throughout the state. So I want to also give a special thanks to the Long-Term Care Planning Committee and the work of David Gutchin and Melissa Morton for their leadership on this work, which is definitely helpful in guiding us as we move forward. And so for that, I'm now going to be passing it on to my co-chair, Joan, and I look forward very much to having some more robust discussion. We're also, as you can tell in the agenda, going to open it up for a group discussion after our first presenter. And thank you all very much. Joan?
Thanks, Michael. It's nice to see everybody. I'm glad everybody was able to attend, and thank you, Nora, for stepping in. I believe you're here for Anna. So today's topic is the long-term care ombudsman, and we have 2 speakers. So I just wanted to welcome and introduce Melanie Lambert, who is the Choices Director for the Department of Aging and Disability Services. She's going to be our first speaker, and we're looking forward to what you have to share with us, Melanie. Even though the topic was specifically the ombudsman, it's not necessary that you're talking about that. You looked a little worried when I said we tried to just come up with some topics at the beginning and put them into placeholders in the dates, but obviously we want to hear what you have to say as far as what you see as issues with senior fraud. And then, like Michael mentioned, we will take a break and then Judge Beverly will join us later and share with us some things that she has found to be issues with respect to senior fraud in her role. So Melanie, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks, Joan. And thank you all for having me today. I am, as you mentioned, the director of the Choices program in Connecticut. And I, was sent some questions to address ahead of time. So I'm going to try and speak to those items in terms of what the Choices program does and how that sort of crosses over with, long-term care Medicaid applications and its relevance to this task force, hopefully. So, Choices is Connecticut's, it's the name of Connecticut's State Health Insurance Assistance Program, or SHIP as it's known federally. In Connecticut, it's called Choices, which is Connecticut's program for health insurance assistance, outreach, information and referral, counseling, and eligibility screening. So there's many different components to the program. The primary work that we do under the SHIP grant is Medicare counseling, so counseling on all parts of Medicare for Medicare beneficiaries, but we are also screening and looking for eligibility for any other programs someone might qualify for, including Medicaid benefits, long-term services and supports, and other community supports, housing, transportation, employment. All of that information and referral happens through the 5 area agencies on aging, who are the sort of hubs of the Choices program in Connecticut. So the 5 area agencies on aging and the Center for Medicare Advocacy, which provides training to Choices team members. And we also do some work with NAMI, the NAMI Connecticut chapter under the Choices program. And I would be remiss not to mention, Choices counterpart, which is Senior Medicare Patrol, or SMP, which is really focused centrally on detecting, protecting, detecting, and reporting fraud related to Medicare. And so most of that Medicare related fraud that we see, especially Medicare marketing violations, things like that, those tend to get referred to our SMP counselors, though many folks are cross-trained between Choices and Senior Medicare Patrol. So just to give a sense of sort of the type of work that we do in terms of numbers, we in the federal fiscal year 2021, we provided 23,320 counseling sessions. So that's one-on-one interactions with beneficiaries on any variety of Medicare related topics, including Medicaid topics, enrollment assistance, Part D comparisons, Medicare Advantage, anything would fall under that. And then from that number of, over 23,000 contacts, 664 of those contacts assisted with Medicaid applications. We don't, in our reporting, we don't separate out long-term care Medicaid applications. So I can't speak to how many of those exactly are long-term care Medicaid, but I would guess it is a very small number because that's just a very small part of what we do. The vast majority of those are going to be for Husky C or MedConnect or another category of Medicaid that somebody who's on Medicare qualifies for. Even if you take that total number of 664, that comes out to about 3% of the contacts for the year. So, Medicaid applications are not a large part of the work that we're doing. And I would guess that far less than 1% of those were, long-term care Medicaid applications. And just for comparison, MSP, the Medicare Savings Program, we do a lot of application assistance for that. So 2,823 of those contacts during that time were MSP application assistance, or about 12% of overall contacts. So we try and screen everyone possible for the Medicare Savings Program. We do a lot of application assistance with that. And then, because we have such generous income limits in Connecticut, a lot more people qualify for that than, say, Husky C or another Medicaid category. So that's also part of the reason that that's a much higher number. Just to speak a little bit to, the populations that we serve. So we serve everybody of all backgrounds and income levels, and any, anything that someone's seeking assistance with. We're funded through several federal grants that to provide outreach and assistance to hard to reach populations of Medicare beneficiaries, including individuals with low incomes, those with limited English proficiency or for whom English is a second language, those with disabilities under age 65 who qualify for Medicare based on disability, individuals living in rural areas, and more through our MIPA grant. There are other categories that also qualify as hard to reach that we try to target for outreach. It's kind of hard to describe how the need is growing in our data right now because of the pandemic, especially. Our contacts are sort of down overall just because outreach has been so drastically curbed due to the pandemic. A lot of our outreach work was in person. And that is often the most successful method for reaching hard to reach populations in our program, from what we found. And so it's kind of hard to talk about scale at the moment, because we've been a bit hampered in terms of our ability to continue outreach during this time. But some of it is picking back up. There's some in-person assistance at various community sites, senior centers, food banks, and so forth that are starting to happen again. And I guess we'll see what happens as we move forward. And I apologize if you can hear my toddler son in the background. So I am working from home, but anyway. In terms of fraud that we see, we really refer, if we're seeing something like that, that usually would get referred to, if it's Medicare related, to the Senior Medicare Patrol or to the appropriate entity. We don't directly address fraud cases within the Choices program. If it's something related to Medicare marketing rules, that's the majority of what we see, and those get referred to SMP. But if it's, let's say an elder abuse case or something, that's going to get referred over to Elderly Protective Services, or if it's, different, I don't know, there's so many different cases that it could be, but those are generally things where we're providing information and referral and not direct assistance. And then in terms of referring to elder law attorneys, so as far as Medicaid questions, we often do get questions about protection of assets and asset transfers and things like that are really not within the scope of Choice's work. And so anything, if it's a straightforward, application or policy question related to the rules, we can give that basic information. Or if it's someone who's low income, who doesn't have any assets, who doesn't have any asset questions, we might be assisting with an application in that case, or just referring to the community options unit or the appropriate intake unit for screening for a Medicaid waiver. But any sort of question about asset transfers or community spouse protections, anything like that is going to get referred to an elder law attorney. And the caller, the caregiver, whomever we're speaking with, is going to be encouraged to speak with an elder law attorney. And that's, explicitly stated in our training on long-term care Medicaid. In terms of how we do this, it's usually just looking up the NALA website, the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys website, and if they want us to put in their zip code and give them, send them a listing for their area, we can do that. We wouldn't refer to anyone specific. We would just kind of give them the information or the hotline, or refer them to legal services if they are low income. Though usually with asset transfers, that's not that's not usually the case. I'm just looking through the other questions that I was sent. So as far as access for individuals whose primary language is not English, all of our agencies on aging that provide Choices services have contracts for telephone language interpreter services in order to assist non-English speaking beneficiaries in whatever language they speak. So I don't know the exact number of languages, but there's a pretty diverse array of languages that are available for interpretation through those services. And we translate our outreach materials most often into Spanish whenever possible. And, we've previously been able to translate our program brochure into 7 other languages, and we're looking to do that again soon. Our Medigap rate and benefit chart is translated into Spanish and French. And we also utilize CMS publications, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services publications that are translated into many different languages, as well as our Technical Assistance Center, which regularly produces Spanish language materials that we're able to utilize for outreach. There's also a lot of outreach through the area agencies on aging themselves that they're doing with Spanish-speaking staff and staff who speak other languages. I know one of the AAAs is doing outreach to Mandarin-speaking group in the western part of the state this week. And when there are team members we try and recruit team members who speak different languages, such as Polish and Mandarin. We also have some staff who sign in ASL and can provide that one-on-one assistance, which is always ideal, rather than having to go through an interpreter. So we do try and recruit for that whenever possible. And just in terms of choices sort of intersecting with complaints about private providers of Medicaid planning services and complaints there. I don't have numbers on that, but it's something sort of anecdotally, like when I was a counselor myself, I remember speaking with family members of those who wanted to apply for long-term care Medicaid and had been contacted by a for-profit organization that offered to assist with the application for a pretty exorbitant fee. And it wasn't clear if this was fraud or if it was just, it wasn't clear what their training was, but it just was sort of a sketchy situation, and just tried to sort of explain that we, what we could offer and what information we could offer, and that they really didn't need to pay thousands of dollars for help with a basic, long-term care Medicaid application. And, sort of explained what their options were. so we do see that. We do hear reports of that occasionally. That was all that I had to talk about. So I guess there's quite a bit of time if there's questions.
Thank you, Melanie. I do have a couple of questions. I don't know if anybody else has, or if it's okay for me to start. I've gotten a couple of clients who've come to me and they've heard, I believe through meeting maybe with their area agency on aging, or maybe it's through a choices counselor, that they don't qualify for the home care program because they're over income. So you mentioned being able to assist somebody if they were working on asset transfer, or not being able to assist somebody, but referring them out if they had questions about asset transfers or community spouse protected amount. What's the training and what's the process for somebody who is over that income? Because I think there's some miscommunication, not that I'm saying it's fraud, but I think we need to be clearer with the consumer, because there are people who are leaving those meetings and assuming they can't get any help, even though they can through a pooled trust. So I just wanted to get some clarification. You mentioned low income. What is the definition of that, and what is the discussion when somebody is over that income threshold?
Sure, that's a great question, and that's definitely a real problem for people getting misinformation. And I just want to also mention, because I did mention the area agencies on aging provide these services, but they also train a team of volunteer team members and in-kind professionals throughout their catchment area who are embedded in the community at senior centers and at various community sites to provide choices services. So to address your question, obviously, sometimes people give the wrong answer, but we do explicitly, one of the questions on our certification exam is, why should someone who's over income or over assets for Medicaid still apply, or still see if they're eligible? And the answer is because some income and assets may not be counted, because there are other, there's pooled trusts, as you mentioned, there's other, that's not addressed specifically in our exam, but we do provide training on the fact that, there are certain, there's different levels, there's different categories, there's different income limits and eligibility limits, and functional and financial criteria. We have a benefits quick guide that is sort of a quick reference tool for all counselors that does show the different home care program for elders, state funded categories and different income limits and asset limits, that is updated regularly. And so our counselors should be equipped with that information to provide accurate information on those income and asset limits. And our training on long-term care Medicaid specifically does address, if someone is over income or over asset, that, we have information on Plan of Connecticut, on pooled trusts, on all of that. That information is provided to our counselors. So obviously, I'm not sure what happened in that case.
Yeah. It's multiple. It's not just one. So I think I believe that there's the process in place and there's the training, but there's definitely some holes in the system. And unfortunately, like you said, it's really harmful for the person who gets that misinformation, because they leave thinking they can't get any help. The other thing that you kind of touched on and that I want to address a little bit is, as far as the process is concerned, is if somebody is over asset and an application is just filed just to kind of see, and I've heard that happens too, is people will tell consumers apply early, apply as soon as possible. And unfortunately, if somebody applies and they're over the asset level, but they are qualified for the state funded program, and there's any sort of a transfer in the history, that then equates to a very small penalty divisor, the $500 a month. So if somebody just applies because they're told you should just apply right away, and they happen to fall into that bucket of, okay, yes, you qualify for the state funded program, but you look back and they've made a $1,000 gift or a $5,000 gift, that's going to equate to a much longer penalty period than if they had gotten the advice to say, don't apply yet. We see that there's a gift in your history and we should do some spend down first. So it's concerning to me that the training is, let's just apply as soon as possible, because then people get stuck in that bucket of having that very small penalty divisor and they're not going to get the assistance. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess I should, again, sort of emphasize that when I'm speaking about like sort of assisting with Medicaid applications, 99% of the time I'm talking about like Husky C and MedConnect and not long-term care Medicaid applications. It's very uncommon for choices counselors to be assisting with that directly, and would normally be referring to the community options unit or to elder law attorneys for those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we had touched about on a couple of previous meetings was maybe coming up with a uniform checklist, so that if these things are evident and very simple, straightforward questions, then seek advice, because I just feel like there's so many different places where people go for help, which is great, but the training is different everywhere. Not everybody has the same training. If people have that list of income and they just look at the income threshold, they might not remember that they're supposed to refer. Right. So I think maybe the checklist that we had been talking about for other reasons could help with this as well. And then, maybe that's just a uniform checklist that anybody who speaks to a consumer about any sort of Medicare or Medicaid would have to go through with a consumer, just so it's very clear that you should seek advice if any of these things apply to you.
I think that would be great for our counselors to have as a tool. I see there's other hands up.
Yeah, Matt, you have your hand up.
Oh, thank you so much, Joan. Welcome, Melanie. Good morning to you. Good to see you. Yeah, just a question. When you walked through the full range of what choices counselors are involved with, so much of the work of this group has been focused on the complicated LTSS Medicaid application. But, when you're giving advice or counseling consumers on Medicare, let alone the complicated evaluation of a Medicare Part D, comparative analysis of, which plan based on the drugs that you are currently taking or perhaps might be taking given your age profile or needs. You're involved in very complicated counseling in the Medicare program in and of itself, let alone the Medicaid program. And Joan has just sort of been walking through some of the complicated features of the home and community-based services aspects of the Medicaid program. But would you comment at all about the complicated nature of the Medicare work that you do? And I'm asking the question because I also want you to answer this question, and that's what are the qualifications of the Medicare counselors? It did sound like there's some sort of a certification process or an exam they take in the final analysis, but is a bachelor's degree required? Is some level of experience? Just so the task force has a sense of what are the qualifications of who right now is providing this important counseling work in Medicare and to much lesser extent Medicaid.
Sure, great question. So. And hopefully I can mention all of that. So please chime back in if I miss a piece in my response.
I do want to say also that if you don't feel you need to answer on the spot, you can follow up with anything to the task force. Yeah, I never want anybody to feel like they need to sort of know right away. But anyway, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, no, I think I can answer that in full right now. So in terms of the process for someone becoming a choices counselor and what the qualifications are, so the first part of it is they submit an application to the choices regional coordinator at one of the area agencies on aging, and then that coordinator, that agency conducts a background check and full like national criminal records check and screening that's required by our federal funders for all team members. And assuming that comes out okay, then they would undergo an interview process, and there's certain subjective factors there. There are no specific education requirements for counselors, but they are required to undergo certain training. So if they go through the screening and interview process and come through that, then they would then be asked to take an orientation session and then 5 full days of training, which used to all be done in person. It's now being done fully remotely, but the first day of that training, well, we've switched the order around a few times, but essentially 2 days of that training are led by the choices regional coordinators and staff, sort of on things like MSP application assistance, and reporting and things that are sort of Connecticut specific and program related administrative tasks. And then there's 3 core days that are led by the Center for Medicare Advocacy. And they provide sort of the core Medicare content, which, as you referenced, is very complex. And they're provided with a training binder that sort of goes over all of the information. We have a National Technical Assistance Center where all the team members are registered, and they have access to additional training modules and materials that are developed by the Medicare Rights Center, so that all of that information is consistent and accurate. And once they complete that 5-day training, they would then be scheduled to take the exam, which they have to pass, obviously, in order to become a team member. And then they would, at some point in that process, by the end of that process, would also need to sign off on the volunteer risk and program management policy manual, which is sort of our sort of like HR handbook of all the policies that they need to adhere to, confidentiality, et cetera, to protect beneficiary information, as well as a memorandum of understanding that, restates a lot of those policies, and especially with emphasis on confidentiality and protecting beneficiary information. So that's sort of the process of becoming a team member. And then there's ongoing training required as well. So team members at a minimum right now are required to attend 2 update trainings a year. There's 1 required update training in the fall that's mandatory for all team members that goes over changes for the coming year related to Medicare, so that those changes are covered. And then there are many other trainings offered throughout the year that are, they can choose from those. So not everyone has the same training as far as those additional components, for example, related to long-term care Medicaid and other areas that are sort of, superfluous to the core work that we do. But everyone has the same core training. And so those who have that additional training might be the folks who would, who would feel comfortable with assisting with something like that. But generally that gets referred on by most team members.
Joan, just a couple of quick follow-ups, because I see that there are other hands up, but is there any, it sounds like there's a section in the binder concerning Medicaid and long-term services and supports, but is there in-person or detailed training regarding those sections in the same way that the Medicare Advocacy Agency provides specialized training?
So the core training has Medicaid content. That is something that, CHIP team members federally are required to have to have a certain level of understanding of. And there is additional training beyond that that would be like in one of those update trainings that we do.
Gotcha.
And then that, that recording is available, and those training materials are available when questions come up. So the last training that was done on that was last summer, and that was done by Patty Richardson, who was the statewide MIPA ADRC coordinator, former Choices state director. And she, reviewed all of the training materials with the Department of Social Services, and in coordination with, their long-term care staff, in terms of fact checking everything and making sure everything was accurate.
Yeah. No, thanks so much. Listen, when you're helping with the application, you call it application assistance, both in terms of Medicare and Medicaid. In either program, are you hands-on ever actually helping to prepare the actual application and gathering or assisting in the gathering or advising in regard gathering of the documents that may need to accompany the application, whether it be basic stuff like birth certificates or social security cards, or in more complicated cases, gathering, financial records and so on. And then just quickly a follow-up to something you had said previously. So in other words, some sense of what you're doing in terms of providing application assistance. Would it be fair to kind of characterize the training related to these complicated LTSS matters as kind of training to identify, quote, issues or spotting issues that your counselors would recognize right away are sort of beyond their expertise to provide, and that's kind of what triggers the referral to either a more expert counselor within your own unit, or a referral to I guess the area agency on aging, or you even indicated that you pulled down a website or a referral source of elder law attorneys across America and here in Connecticut as well. But anyway, a little more information on the application assistance. And then the triggering, the training and triggering of the referrals. And I'll be done there. And thank you again, Melanie, so much for coming this morning.
Oh, sure. So I think I can address that. So the thing about Choices counselors is many of them have other roles. So they may be trained as a Choices counselor, but they may also serve at an area agency on aging as an aging and disability resource counselor, or as they may have additional training to provide other types of assistance for that agency. Or again, there are in-kind professionals at senior centers and at community sites throughout that have other forms of training. So I couldn't give you a definitive answer as to whether any Choices counselor in the state is doing that, document gathering. I can say that, to my knowledge, it's not something that's prohibited by any means, to sort of assist someone with gathering those documents and to sort of put all of that together. But I would say, in my experience as someone who has actually been a Choices counselor and an aging and disability resource counselor at one of the AAAs, most of the time, I don't remember ever doing that. I remember a lot of referrals to what at the time was the alternate care unit, what's now the community options unit, for that assistance, because the amount of time and the amount of work that's involved, it's really more case manager work. It's really, it's very involved, and it's not something that most staff, I think, would necessarily have the capacity for. And so that would usually get passed on. But, the suggestion earlier to have a sort of checklist, a little like sort of cheat sheet for when those referrals should go elsewhere, I think would be a very useful tool. As I said, we have our quick guide for counselors, but that may not be sufficient for making that determination.
Thanks, Melanie. Laura, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hi, Melanie. Thanks for coming and providing all of that information. And I think it was very helpful to us to understand the level of training that the choices counselors receive, and the idea of the volume of actual Medicaid applications that they might be assisting with is relatively small. Comment that came up was, hearing about situations where maybe somebody didn't receive accurate information. What would your suggestion be in those instances if there's someone who maybe, received training and maybe didn't understand something, or, understood something and maybe is giving out incorrect information? Obviously, it's something that the State Unit on Aging and you want to remedy so it doesn't happen again. What do you recommend in those cases? Because it does happen. It does happen. So we want to make sure, that hears that information, knows where to go to get that corrected.
Yeah, and I found that enlightening, kind of hearing those reports of those cases, specifically coming from choices counselors, and that we clearly need to do better training in that area if that's happening. If our counselors are kind of saying, go ahead and apply now, when that's not necessarily in the care recipient's best interest or in the family's best interest. I don't know that, that's something that we are providing sufficient training on right now. And so that's very helpful to be aware of that. But I would say, with any, as Matt was referring to the complicated nature of the work we do, with any report of, a counselor giving out inaccurate information, our regional coordinators are, providing additional training whenever they receive reports. If I receive a report, I'm, talking with the team at the respective AAA on how we can address this better in training. We do a lot of statewide trainings now, especially because due to the pandemic, it's become, very easy to do that. And so we've standardized a lot of that and made those trainings available statewide rather than regional. And so it's been a lot easier when we see that, this is getting frequently misunderstood. Like, for example, with Medicare Savings Program, the earned income disregard is something that sometimes gets forgotten about, which kind of creates a similar problem where someone who's still working is being told, like, no, you don't qualify for Medicare Savings Program, you're over the income limit. And, that counselor forgetting that, essentially half of that person's income will not be counted towards eligibility. And so those are the kind of things where we try and say, all right, well, we need to do an update training, to make sure that counselors are clear on this. I send out emails that get distributed statewide, but we try and address that whenever we see those issues come up. So this particular one I was not aware of, but my response to that is we need to do better training then on that issue. On that topic.
So as long as you know about the issue, you can remedy it.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great question, Laura, because a lot of times when we hear this, the client might not remember who they spoke to, but they might remember where they were and the day and the time. And so if we had that sort of detail, who would we contact? It's a really good question because I haven't followed up to report any of this, but in order for you all to know that it's happening still and that training might need to be updated, I think it's a really good point and a step that we'd have to take. So I guess in addition to a checklist for people who are meeting with people, we also probably need to have some sort of knowledge of who do we call, when we get these reports that are not exactly detailed and we don't know the exact name. We don't know necessarily if it was a choices counselor because they may have been at the senior center, could have been so I guess I don't know if there's one place that we could report this or not, but that would be helpful.
I would say, first of all, you're always welcome to contact me and I can make sure that, we figure out where it came from and if it came from one of our counselors. But we also do have the Choices statewide hotline, which is 1-800-994-9422. It's up on our website, which would connect you with the area agency on aging in the region that you're calling from if you did call that hotline. We also have a list of the catchment areas of the area agencies on aging on our statewide website by town. Certainly want to make available that information. We're also working right now on sort of a referral form that can be used by partner agencies that will route to the appropriate agency, though that would be less applicable to sort of a complaint issue. But I guess I would say when in doubt, just shoot me an email and I'll be happy to provide my contact information.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Laura, did you have anything else?
No.
Okay. I think Marie had her hand up next.
Thank you. I have a couple of comments. Thanks, Melanie, for sharing. First of all, I think, Joan, to your point, some of the area agencies on aging are also access agencies, and that is such a complicated thing for the Connecticut landscape to understand. Some are and some are not. When you are an access agency, you are the contractor for the Connecticut Home Care Program, which is the Medicaid waiver. So when a client comes to you and says, I heard it from my agency on aging, could very well be that they went through the application process for the Connecticut Home Care Program, and someone from, a care manager from the Medicaid side of the house, so to speak, gave them that information, and it was not a choices counselor. I've been in my position for almost 14 years, and the choices program will very infrequently do a long-term care application or even provide any guidance. There's no reason for them to. Our care managers are taught how to identify the functional and financial needs of individuals and make that referral over to the access agency side of the house. Get that application in through a send to the community options group under the Department of Social Services and get that person connected that way. What I will say, and what I've said from the beginning of this task force, is education is desperately needed on both ends of the house, on both the choices end, so that they can understand at least when to make the referral, and we're sure that they're comfortable saying that. And also on the access agency, where you've got relatively inexperienced care managers, going through a bachelor's of social work program certainly doesn't give you the education and information you need to help someone with a very complicated long-term care application process. And while you were talking, I took the liberty of just going on DSS's website to find out what the income and eligibility guidelines are, because of course I know them, and we fill out hundreds of applications, help people fill them out through the access agency side every month. However, if you go on, it does say that there is an income limit. DSS's website takes you to My Place CT, where if you look at Husky C, it gives a very definitive income limit for the program. And it says nothing about reaching out to an elder law attorney or the possibility or the option to do a pooled trust. And then if you go down right underneath Husky C on the same website, long-term services and supports, it gives you a very definitive income and asset number and says nothing about the opportunity to have applied income or to look at a pooled trust or to look at other opportunities. So when we say the area agencies on aging are giving out misinformation, our best resources to find the information are not making it clear to anyone, whether they be an employee of an agency on aging or they be the general public, that these other options are available. And it would be very difficult without a coordinated system throughout the state to explain these complexities to individuals, and especially to our on-staff choices counselors, because Melanie, I don't think, at least in the Southwest region, our counselors who are volunteers are not providing Medicaid assistance or assistance with applications to anyone. But on staff, especially a place like, to use Bridgeport as an example, people have nowhere else to go, and they are coming here for application assistance. So I think there's an opportunity here for education for sure. But before we say, people are giving out misinformation, we have to look at our own state resources and say, how clear are they? Because if I went onto this website and didn't know what I know, I would absolutely think that a person at a certain income is ineligible.
Yeah, it's a great point, Marie. I mean, it's across the board, like you said, that there's just not necessarily misinformation. It's just it's information that's difficult sometimes for people to understand, and it seems very clear. I think that's the biggest issue. A lot of this seems very clear, and it's not, and that's where people get into problems because even if they do the research on their own, which a lot of people are doing now, like you just did, and they find that income number mentioned, they're just not going to seek out help because it seems very clear, but they don't realize that it's not. So thank you for that. Michael, you had your hand up, and then Steve looks like, and we're about 10:53.
Right. Thank you so much. And I definitely appreciate this conversation. So it's been great to kind of like unearth some of these issues that we can kind of use to go forward. So I guess one of the questions is kind of like just a reflection, like perhaps maybe do you think, Melanie, it would be helpful if the Elder Bar helped develop some training modules for choices to perhaps help kind of align kind of the issues that are being spotted out there in the wild to and help kind of with the continuing education of the counselors. Do you think that would be something that would be helpful?
Absolutely. I mean, we are always looking to, provide that cross training. I would say that, as Marie really, really thoroughly explained, it's really being able to spot when those referrals need to happen, and rather than necessarily providing that one-on-one assistance with those long-term care Medicaid applications, and those kind of making sure that we're making those referrals appropriately at the appropriate time and giving out accurate information. I think that would be fantastic if we could get those training modules. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm just going to make a quick note that we do want to still have a break, but I like this conversation, and one of the things we heard from our second speaker, the probate court judge, is that she's has another meeting, and so I want to be able to still have the conversation amongst our group before we bring her, and also let Steve ask his question too before we move on to having the judge here when she checks in with us. So it's 10:55. Melanie, are you able to stick around a little bit if we took a 5-minute break?
Sure.
Right now? And then Steve, would you mind after the break if we could ask your question? And then after that, we can maybe have a little group discussion, and then hopefully the judge will be ready for us by then. Would that be all
Not
right
at
with
all.
everyone? Okay.
Mm.
Okay, so it's 10:55 now. So I'm gonna, I guess we'll take a quick pause. I'm gonna step away from my desk for a moment. We'll come back at 11, and then we'll continue with Steve's question. Thank you, everyone. Okay, welcome back, everyone. And we have the Judge Beverly with us. Hello, good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Good morning. So just as a quick update before we went to our break, we're going to have our member, Steve Rubin, complete a question with our previous, our first guest. We're going to have a brief discussion with our group, and then we're going to move on to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I was listening in, so I will just stay tuned until you're ready for me.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Okay, Steve.
Thanks, Michael. Actually, and good morning, Your Honor. So actually, Melanie, before I get to my question, I really liked Michael's idea about the elder bar preparing some educational things. And as the current president of NALA for Connecticut, I think we'd be happy to do so. So I'll shoot you an email after this and we can discuss, because I know our membership would really enjoy that. But one of my questions is, how often do you track whether you're doing with the assistance unit in these situations, or whether it's like an agent under a power of attorney or a conservator?
So I'm not sure if I understand the question. So in terms of application assistance, are we tracking the source of who we're speaking with, and whether that's a power of attorney or conservator?
Yeah, whether it's like the individual, the power of attorney, conservators, with the applications and how you're helping.
That's a good question. So choices overlaps with the information and referral component of what the area agencies on aging are doing. That's not my area, so I'm going to speak to that the best I can. What I will say is that my understanding of the way that the data tracking works for information referral would include whether someone is a caregiver or not a caregiver. But I don't believe, I believe there's tracking of conservatorship as a topic. I don't think they're recording beyond that in terms of the source of who they're speaking with and those referrals. I don't think it's getting down to that granular detail now. But it's not within the data tracking we do under choices. So I can't give you a definitive answer on that.
I think that actually covers everything I was going to ask. So thank you.
Okay.
You answered kind of more than I was asking, so it's even better.
Very
Okay.
good. Go ahead, Joe.
I was just going to say, I don't see any other hands. So I don't know if there's any other questions for Melanie, or if you wanted to have a little brief discussion among the members, Michael. Was there something that you wanted to particularly start off with?
I will say that our member Laura might have a question that she brought up, and I wanted to be sure that we address it, and then we can move on to Judge Beverly. Thank you.
And maybe this is something we can talk about during the next meeting, since Judge Beverly is patiently waiting for us, and I have to sign off a little bit early because I'm hosting a webinar. But maybe it's something we can all think about before the next meeting, is that, I think some of us have communicated that we want to focus the discussion and understand what area of fraud that we're looking at. And I understand a lot of the meetings that we have been having have been focused on Medicaid applications. That is something that was stated in the bill, but I for the group's purposes, I wanted to find out, are there other areas of fraud that we're supposed to be or want to look at? Because we've never clarified that. So at some point, I'd like to clarify that, because if that's the case, then we may need to hear from other speakers, because there's fraud is, as I've mentioned multiple times in the past, fraud is a very broad topic. And so are we just going to address one area of fraud, or are we going to address two? If so, what are we going to address? That still hasn't been clarified, at least in my mind. So if that has been clarified and I was, I missed that, please let me know. But if not, I think is a discussion we need to have, especially certainly before we get to, I mean, we're almost towards the end of our time because we need to file this report sometime in February, so we need more speakers. So I just wanted to bring that in case I wasn't the only one who, kind of felt like we were going down a path, but we had never really, focused our discussion or discussed, how broad of a topic we were going to cover, or how narrowly we were going to address the topic that we were tasked to, discuss and report on.
So I thought there was an email that went out with the dates and the topics. At the original meeting, we had talked about, we opened it up for members to bring up what they thought the topics we should discuss were. And then I know Michael and Joe and I sent around some emails putting them into the schedule. And if they did not get to the whole membership, I apologize, but I thought they did. So it is broader than Medicaid planning services, although that was the original reason for the task force to be started. And so that's why that was specifically included. And we had the first two meetings about that. The next two meetings we have, the next one is a public hearing. So there's no specific topic. And then the final one is actually, I believe, the topic that you had raised as far as ways to bolster protective services for the elderly. So that, is a little broader than the Medicaid planning services, but I think you're right. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about this. Perhaps, I don't know if we're allowed to speak, just have a email communication among the members, or if we have to do it in a meeting. If we wanted to talk about more specifics about what that means and what we're looking for.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful not only for the group, but for the purposes of the report that we need to put out, is if our focus is only on Medicaid planning, then fine. But I do believe that the bill indicates that it's including but not limited to that. And we never really sort of said, okay, these are the areas of fraud we want to look at. We did talk about organizations that we'd like to hear from, but so far they've really been focused on the Medicaid planning piece, and we're sort of limited in our time. So if we're going to look at other areas of fraud, we may want to hear from organizations like AARP that deals with consumer fraud, or we might want to hear from Legal Services, who has a consumer project for elders, law project for elders. They see a lot of fraud. So, but it's not the same sort of fraud that we've been talking about thus far. So I just want to bring that up.
Right. And it is meant to be broader because the bill did encompass all of that. And I think given the limited time that we had, we tried to pare it down to those particular topics. So we do have a couple of more meetings that we can talk about who we would want to bring in for those meetings.
As far as the areas of fraud, are we talking about fraud that occurs, again, it's such a broad topic. I wanted to define it at the beginning of the meetings that we were having for the task force, and I was waiting for that to happen. It hasn't happened yet. So I guess I just want a clearer idea of, is this the specific topic of fraud that we're talking about that we've been discussing so far, or are there going to be other ones, such as stranger fraud, where it's telephone or email or scams, or is it the type of fraud that occurs within families? We never really defined what fraud is, at least for purposes of this task force. And so I think even for the report, we're going to have to do that.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it included all of that.
The bill, because the bill did not define it for us. So,
my thought was that we would, with the members who've brought up the different topics, hopefully work with them to bring in people that they thought would be beneficial for the group, and not necessarily define fraud beforehand, but listen to what the speakers had to say, so we can kind of develop a report from there. But all of the things that you mentioned, I would consider part of the definition. So if somebody had a speaker to come in who could speak to issues with family fraud, I think I would be open to that. And I think it's open to the task force. But like you said, we don't have a lot of time. So if everybody wanted to just say, let's focus on one particular area because we only have a couple of meetings left, I guess we could do that as well. But I was kind of waiting to see who people wanted to bring forward with the particular topics that we had presented.
All right, very good. And if I may, and I appreciate that question, Laura. And for me, I think, again, exactly right. We have, not too much time, but also I think there's the possibility of, if we don't have time in a meeting, we can still receive testimony from people about specific topics if they want. And I also was thinking that, the topics that are important to our members are, are important for the report. So, exactly right. There's telephone fraud that's been going on. There's other types of crimes that can happen that are, misrepresentation, commingling of funds, and things like that. But in the interest of time, before I wanted to see if any of our other members had any other reflections on this before we could move on to bring Judge Beverly onward. But I think this is important, and I think it's something that we can continue to work on. But ultimately speaking, because we're going so broadly, there's all sorts of really great concepts that I think have been revealed and uncovered throughout these discussions that we can capture and sift through the sand, and so that we can have a nice broadcast spectrum of different concepts that we can bring forward, like we were even just discussing today with Steve and Melanie. So do any other members have any concepts they want to quickly discuss before we move along?
Michelle has her hand up.
Yes, Michelle.
Just to follow up real quick on what everyone has said, I think it's so important. Attorney Levine brought up, I think 2 weeks ago, that we should have a client bill of rights to protect the clients, and that's a great idea. But my concern is always the workers, and being in this field and working with all the choices counselors, we do the best we can, and we do what's best for our clients, but we aren't lawyers. And I think the ideas you guys have brought up are fantastic. I think it's so important that we define what a helper is when you're helping someone with an application. Let them know what the consequences are and how we could do harm to our clients. I think we're not aware of that. We're working so hard on protecting them and getting them assistance that we're just not aware of those things. So I wanted to bring that up, that in addition to the client being aware of all of these things, I think the workers are key.
Very good.
Thank you, Michelle.
Anyone else? Your Honor, are you ready? And just to clarify, would you be operating the slide? Joe's got it? Okay, perfect. All right, thank you.
Joe has the slideshow. Thank you. So first of all, thank you for allowing me to present before you. I think, as Attorney Stauning shared, the concept or the topic of elder fraud is so far-reaching and significant that the work of this task force in just the few short weeks you have is really a monumental task. But I appreciate the attention each of you are giving to this very important and unfortunately growing topic in our nation. I thought it would be beneficial. Some of you are familiar with the probate court system, but I thought it would be beneficial for some of you who aren't as intimately engaged in our work to kind of outline the probate system for you. So we did share, I think electronically, this PowerPoint, and just quick agenda was really to introduce our system to you and some of what we experience in terms of elder fraud and protecting senior citizens. So you could probably go to the third slide. Thank you. So as some of you may know, there are actually 60 probate courts throughout the state of Connecticut. 54 of them are of the general jurisdiction in the probate area. We have 6 regional children's probate courts. And I mentioned the children's courts, although not necessarily what you may think of in terms of the domain of senior citizens, but a significant number of the guardians of children appointed in the regional children's probate courts are elders. They are the grandparents, elder aunts and uncles, and family members stepping in to parent younger generations. So they are also part of the domain of where we look for resources and protection measures. A significant part of what we do in the probate court system really is to focus on family-centered and community-based solutions, which ties in. I think Michael at the last meeting talked significantly about making sure our elder population can age well, age in place, and those are a key element of what we try to accomplish in the probate court system. Because of those kind of community-based and family-centered solutions, the work in the probate court actually is significantly impactful in terms of tax-saving dollars. As a result of our work, we defer people from entering elder or long-term care facilities by trying to keep them living in the community through conservator solutions. We deflect people from having to be in psychiatric intensive inpatient programs. The net result of all of those services, keeping children with grandparents instead of foster care, is actually $1.5 billion in savings every year to the state of Connecticut and taxpayers. I would like to highlight that throughout the pandemic, all of our courts remained open and full operations. Although the public may not have been able to physically walk in the doors, the operations of all of the courts remained at full capacity, which I have to say, I commend the court staff and the judges. They did not have the capacity. They do not have the capacity to work remotely. They are physically in the courts, meeting the needs every day, answering the phone, scheduling hearings through WebEx, and returning to in-person proceedings. Next slide. Big picture in terms of conservatorships in Connecticut, there are really 2 types of conservatorships some of you may know. There is a voluntary proceeding where the petitioner, him or herself, is actually requesting the court to appoint a conservator for them. Oftentimes those are limited in scope. For example, you have an elder person who is finding managing their finances to be particularly complex, but they're quite capable and want to continue to make all of their own medical care decisions. So we may have a limited conservatorship of the estate. And I see this often actually in the domain of seeking Title 19 planning and meeting those kind of assistance programs. Involuntaries, when someone's capacity is impaired to the degree that they can no longer meet their own needs, whether it's personal care, financial, or legal planning. And even there, it is a spectrum of authorities by statute that can be granted to the conservator to tailor it to meet the needs of that specific conserved person in the least restrictive means. The court grants the authority to manage the assets, typically requiring either a restriction on the assets through restricted account agreements with financial institutions or a probate bond. And it's important to highlight that conservatorship, by all respects, is really a solution of last resort. In the probate court system, we actually have approximately 20,000 conserved persons. About half of those individuals are indigent, and significantly a younger age group is being conserved. I think that, again, in one of your earlier meetings, we talked about the baby boomers, the aging population, the numbers of individuals that are going to be age 60 and older, 65 and older is really just escalating. And we, as a state system, in all of our agencies, have to be prepared probably with not the resources we need, but certainly the demands and the needs are going to be growing. Right now, approximately 4,000 new conservatorship petitions are filed with the court system every year. Next slide. The probate court system, I believe, has been very innovative and attentive to ensuring improvements in our own system, working collaboratively with organizations like the Elder Justice Coalition, AARP. Actually, I believe through those particular organizations, my predecessor and this system worked closely to pass Public Act 17.7, which provided for enhanced oversight in the domain of conservatorships. We are now have formal written standards of practice, which each conservator, whether a family member or a professional, are obligated to adhere to. We have developed through a grant with the State Justice Initiative, which is a federal grant program, online conservatorship training modules in both English and Spanish, as well as 2 different modules if you are a family member or a lay conservator in our terminology, or in some instances, an attorney or professional. Another key element of that public act was our ability through my office, the Office of the Probate Court Administrator, to actually conduct random audits of conservator accounts. And that's an important element because it's somewhat, although we can't possibly audit every single account, the concept that as a conservator, your accounting may be audited is similar to that concern we all have about being audited by the IRS. It does give a certain level of precautionary awareness to make sure that you are expending funds properly, using the funds, marshaling the assets, and doing the proper planning to meet the needs of that conserved person. And I do think that those are really critical initiatives that are in the probate court system now. Next slide. Additional safeguards that we do have is our commitment, not only legislatively, but philosophically, to ensuring the least restrictive setting for the conserved persons. Again, ensuring and maximizing the ability of our elders or anyone with a capacity issue to remain aging in place, living in the community. These proceedings, all conservatorship proceedings, are public, except for limited medical evidence that comes in involuntary proceedings typically. Safeguards to protect the right of the respondent and the conserved person is each one must have their own attorney or be appointed an attorney. And as I indicated earlier, about half of our conserved persons are indigent and therefore qualify for a court-appointed attorney at no expense to that person. Conservators are obligated to report to the court every year with an annual conservator report and a full review of the conservatorship to determine if it should be continued, should it be modified, either expanding or decreasing the authorities for the conserved person, or terminated entirely because the conserved person can be restored and is capable of managing his or own affairs or making their own decisions. And that full review happens at year 1 of a conservatorship appointment and then every 3 years thereafter. Next slide. You may very well be aware of the FBI's recent 2020 elder fraud report that was just released maybe a month and a half ago. And this is, to Laura's point about the broad nature of elder fraud. It's certainly fantastic that the Elder Bar, through the Aging Committee, pursued the development of this task force. And I know that one of the initial focuses was Medicaid planning. But the harm and the consequence of elder fraud is huge. It is billions of dollars. In Connecticut, we have, and I don't know if you've seen that report, but there are over 105,000 reports of elder fraud victims, twice as many since 2015, and increasing not only in terms of number of victims, but monetary loss year over year. 2020 was huge in terms of this reporting. And I note that not all fraud is reported. I think Attorney Rubin noted at an earlier meeting that many times individuals who are defrauded are embarrassed. They feel they shouldn't have been that gullible. They don't want the public or their family to know. The fear of being conserved, or just that general embarrassment that, gee, how did I let that happen? So I fear, honestly, that the numbers reported by the FBI for just 2020 are probably maybe just the tip of the iceberg. Connecticut is in the middle of the pack. We are number 26 in terms of all states, with 1,057 reported victims, number 24 in terms of loss. And this is just 1 year, $10 million in losses. And certainly, I think we're all very sensitive to the isolation that has occurred as a result of the pandemic, increased online activity by seniors, whether it's for shopping or FaceTiming with family members or reaching out into the community. And unfortunately, that is a growing risk factor for all of us, candidly. Cybersecurity and ordering something online, it never shows up because it's not really a legitimate website. And all of that is a growing area of fraud, not just for seniors, but all of us. Three of the significant items that are reported in the FBI's report that concern me and are certainly areas that we've seen in the probate courts are victims of confidence fraud, romance fraud, someone who becomes, the next best friend of the senior, isolates that individual from family. And that fraud just in 2020 was $281 million. Investment fraud, another area, I think that is probably something that occurs when individuals are looking to protect assets for eligibility for Title 19, for example, and they unwittingly invest funds, put funds where they shouldn't be, thinking they're doing right, and ultimately are defrauded at a cost of $100 million a year. The other one I've actually seen in my own court, in the Milford Orange Probate Court, is the increasing number of victims for lottery, sweepstakes, and inheritance winnings. We had one individual who actually, through Elderly Protective Services, the petition was brought before the court because she was literally turning over all of her assets and most of her income to someone who kept telling her she kept winning the sweepstakes. And her winnings were coming, the winnings were coming, the winnings were coming. She firmly, absolutely believed that she had won, I think it was $30 million, and that her Mercedes-Benz was being shipped from across the ocean, from Europe, and it was on its way, and she was going to continue to give these individuals her funds because it perpetuated her winnings. And it's all on the rise. So for this task force, I guess my gut reaction is that this task force is really just in its preliminary stages, and I, for one, think that further development of what the needs in our state are is probably something that we should continue to focus on. Next slide. Really, my closing remarks is, as we indicated in the FBI report and what we see in the probate system is, statistically, probably a handful of individuals or entities, but have a significant monetary impact. And the red flags when we have individuals who are isolated, a huge result of the pandemic that continues to this day. My recommendations, candidly, is that prevention is the best approach. And much of that can be done through continued collaboration. We have, the members of this task force, you come from a diverse group of organizations and entities. Over the past, as I shared with the Conservatorship Accountability Act, my office, my system worked with AARP. We've worked with the Connecticut Bankers Association, the Elder Justice Coalition, and there are many organizations even on the more local level. Our senior centers have also been a fantastic resource for educating our seniors, bringing speakers from all of these organizations to help them understand what are the red flags, when should you be questioning, when should you be reaching out for help. I'll tell you, our probate judges are phenomenal. Historically, they have been very prolific community presenters and speakers. And we hope that with the reopening of all of the senior centers that has been occurring in different facilities, that they will be resuming their outreach to help educate the public and our elders on the best way to protect themselves. Really, that's all I have. I do want to share the last slide is our website. We have some great resources on conservatorships. The user guides for conservators are written so that you don't have to be a lawyer or a judge to understand the process. All of the forms anyone would need. In the middle of the screen, you will see a link that's highlighted that leads you to more specific information if you are a conservator, either professionally or as a family member, and that will bring you to those online training modules, which are free of charge, so anyone can utilize them. Our website is linked to Google Translate, so although all of the forms and guides are predominantly, the user guides are in English and Spanish, but the website and the information there can be translated to any language. As we have a growing population of vulnerable constituents for whom English isn't their first language, and they may feel more comfortable reading and reviewing in the language of their comfort. My overriding message really to this task force is increased collaboration, increased educational opportunities, and really to do so not to be reactive to elder fraud that's escalating, but to help all of us reach our constituents for prevention and awareness. So I thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts, to share with you a little bit about the probate court system, and to answer any questions or hear suggestions you may have for our system as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for that. And I really appreciate your presentation and those comments. And I do have two quick questions before I open it up to the rest of the group. But I really want to agree with your emphasis on collaboration, education, prevention, and awareness. I think, too, as we've had our discussions and we talk about kind of consequences and we talk about what happens downstream, is this going to be pursued by the Chief State's Attorney's Office? Are there resources? Does it meet a threshold? Does mom want to press charges on her kid? I think that, you know, the prevention aspect is so important. And so, you know, I'm going to just briefly ask, you know, one of the topics we've heard about before and one of the new recommendations from the long-term supports and services report for the next 3 years included this concept of expanding the ombudsman. And again, when we have 70% now of our senior population staying at home, and these are folks who could be considered consumer employers, do you think that's something that would be beneficial for the state to have non-mandated reporter advice available for people to help kind of with this prevention work?
I think the more resources that we can put in the communities, more locally accessible, will certainly be beneficial. You know, one of the items I didn't really mention, I think Laura had mentioned there was discussion at the last meeting about the mandatory training, for example, for financial agents. I mean, the probate court system, one of kind of the first line of protection I've seen in my experience has been the local banks. They are very well trained. They often would alert either the probate court or notify elderly protective services. And so expanding that kind of training and the resources, whether it's individuals at the senior center or municipal human resources offices, I can tell you that Mairead Painter and her long-term care ombudsman team throughout the pandemic were phenomenal in their outreach during the isolation and inaccessibility to individuals in nursing homes. And so that may very well be one of the good forums to utilize for expansion of services.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And the follow-up was just that, you know, we had in our previous conversations, and I'm so glad that you've been watching our meetings. You know, I asked about this concept of, you know, dedicated pro bono services by the elder bar, maybe reduced fees, maybe a clinic, a dedicated clinic, maybe an assessment of the elder bar as in general, as far as what language offerings they have and what other kind of resources they might bring to the table. You know, we already had a brief discussion, maybe they can give some training to the choices. Do you think that's something that would be helpful?
I can tell you that through the probate court system, we have a phenomenal panel of attorneys who do accept court appointments as attorneys for or to act as fiduciary for individuals, for conserved persons, as well as in the children's court. They are certainly a great wealth of expertise. And again, to my point about collaboration, I think getting the professionals who know how to do the proper planning, know all the resources, I think it's a great idea to pursue. I do think the elder bar has done a great job in this area, and a lot of the local bar associations. I happen to be a member of the Milford Bar Association, and they have ongoing educational opportunities, but they also do volunteer work. They'll do a clinic day once or twice a year at the senior center, sometimes on a variety of topics, but this would be another avenue for outreach. Again, to share the expertise to the people who need it.
Thank you. Joan?
Yes, I thank you very much, Judge Beverly. That was really helpful. And I think it helped bring us into the other topics that we wanted to talk about, because as Laura mentioned, the first couple of meetings were focused on Medicare planning services, and that's not the only focus of the task force. So it was really helpful to hear from you. And as you mentioned, we did talk in one of our previous meetings about the training that banks get, which was what I was thinking about while you were talking, because I think it kind of goes along the same lines as the checklist we were talking about for Medicaid planning, is if there can be training in the community for the people who might see this fraud, it's going to help. But I think Michael's point and idea about the ombudsman is really key to it, because we need one central place that these reports can be sent. And we have protective services for the elderly now, but I think it would be really helpful to have that additional entity or agency who people know that they can report to. The banks are great about it, but I think they're trained well because they have their own financial reasons to train their workers well. I have other clients who the post office worker has caught somebody trying to send a money order or something. So there's some training along those lines as well. But if we could get more training out there, and then in conjunction have somebody who everybody knows this is the phone number to call, or this is the person to call when you see this, it will only help, because it's happening everywhere and it's happening in a lot of different ways. And it's hard for one training system to just keep up with all of that. But I totally agree with everything that you said about the collaboration and just educating and training everybody who might see this.
I think, you know, one of the challenges in terms of reporting, I think, as Laura had mentioned at the last meeting as well, limited resources for local police departments, state's attorney's office, when much of the fraud can be by a family member and you have someone who won't press charges. Reporting, I think, is important for data collection. I am concerned about what happens next for the individual who reports it, because you may end up having almost a negative consequence if they feel I reported it and nothing happened, or I reported it and all my rights were taken away in a conservatorship. I think what we have to blend with reporting and training is also what happens next. What can we do to facilitate solutions for the victims in a positive way? And that's probably the hardest part of the equation.
Well, and I think along those lines, the ombudsman idea of not being a mandatory reporter could be somebody who then someone would feel comfortable reaching out to, because as Steve mentioned in one of our previous meetings, and we see sometimes people don't want to report because then, like you said, they're afraid it's going to go down the path of I'm going to be conserved and my rights are going to be taken away. So if there's somebody who people feel comfortable would just be able to listen and not necessarily have to report it, that could help with that. Matt, you have your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, thanks. Thank you so much, Joan, and good morning, Your Honor. And thank you also for being here this morning. You certainly have brought us back to the issue of how broad-based fraud is, especially financial exploitation of our elders in the community. And I'm very familiar with the sort of explosion of the aging population across America, and especially here in New England, and more in particular in Connecticut, the 6th oldest nation right now. Strike that, the oldest state in the nation. But I saw a statistic recently, Your Honor, that really struck me, and that's that the first of the baby boomers in America, and those you know well are those folks that were born between 1946 and 1964. You know, the first of those folks begin turning 80 in 2025, and so at our doorstep is the explosion of this population. And you so eloquently talked about the awesome volunteerism and even involuntary conservatorships that occur in the system right now. But a big issue is how are we going to address the ongoing and expanded needs of conservatorships, you know, in the system going forward. But in answering that question, if you could also sort of weave into the notion of in the Medicaid application process, again, I think this is a small, I think it's slowly sort of emerging as a smaller concern when we're discussing, and that isn't to suggest it's not a concern, but it's a smaller concern when we talk about the broad-based financial exploitation of elders, which we often find with family members. But one of the things we've been talking about, maybe me in particular, is the qualifications of those persons who have an interface with this process. Everyone from even attorneys and those that, you know, are not able to say they're Medicaid specialists, but clearly have a specialty in long-term services and support in Medicaid, and the eligibility workers at the Department of Social Services. And even today, you know, trying to get our arms around the idea of what are the qualifications of the choices workers that provide some level of not actually application assistance per se, but call it advice, and certainly not legal advice. But I generally understand that you don't, while you discuss, you're entitled to a court-appointed attorney in a involuntary conservatorship. You're not required to be an attorney in the first instance to be a conservator, let alone an attorney that has a specialized expertise, if you will, in the area of Medicaid. And even more to the point, even though I believe most probate court judges are attorneys in Connecticut, they're not required to be attorneys as well. And so this level of expertise or qualifications for a group of people that have a lot of interface on this fraud question and a growing demand on our horizon. I wonder if you could just comment on that, if you would, Your Honor. And good morning again, and welcome, and thank you so much for appearing today.
Good morning again. Thank you. A lot of questions in one, so I'm going to try to hopefully touch on all of them. First, let me clarify that actually effective in January 2011, when the court system went under significant reform and consolidation, the law was changed so that all probate judges elected after that point, if they hadn't previously served, actually do have to be lawyers. So that is a requirement. We do have, I believe, only one judge who is not a lawyer at this time. In 2007 was a significant reform of the conservatorship statutes as well. And the qualifications of someone to be appointed a conservator was also significantly expanded, and probate judges are required to ensure that the individual to be appointed as a conservator is qualified. Now, not necessarily a Title 19 expert or an expert in dementia or any particular limited scope that they may have to administer, but certainly the qualifications do have to be adjudicated by the probate court. Secondly, as I shared with the Conservator Accountability Act that was passed in 2017, is every conservator, whether you are a family member or a professional, you must adhere to the standards standards of practice, which are based on the National Guardianship Association guidelines and standards. The term conservator is used as a guardian in some other states, so sometimes you'll hear that cross terminology. But I do think that in our system, whether you are expressly trained as a lawyer or a legal experience Title 19 planner, whatever that is, there are strict guidances and standards that you must adhere to meet the needs of your conserved person. In addition is that online training I shared. Now we have contract conservators in our state now, and they are obligated to undergo that training. That is one of the components to enter into a contract as a contract conservator. And again, just to emphasize that probate judges do have to go through the statutory qualifications. One of the other comments you made is about, our baby boomers and our escalating aging population, and how are we going to continue to meet those needs? It's a resource challenge, right? Right now, the expenses for court-appointed attorneys and conservators for indigent individuals is about $8 million a year. We had a very successful legislative recognition last year. The state legislature approved our general fund appropriations at the levels that we needed to ensure that those indigent and constitutional protections could continue to be paid for. And that recognition and that funding level is something that is important for our system so that we can continue to meet those protective measures and mandates. But I'll tell you that indigency expense right now trends year over year about a 5% increase. I expect, as you shared, 2025 is it that we're going to start hitting our 80s for baby boomers. That number of indigency level of expense for our system is probably going to balloon as well. And I think that's an issue for the state at large. Skilled facility care, assisted living care, elderly housing in our communities, all of that is really going to balloon. We have a lot of schools and a lowering school age population. So I think it's something that our system as a whole really has to be focusing on how do we reshuffle our resources as our population demographics change.
Thank you so much, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions?
I'm just going to make a shout out for Laura. I think that Laura signed off because one of the initiatives that the Elder Justice Coalition of Connecticut with the Elder Bar section of the Connecticut Bar Association and my office are working on are what we call Lunch and Learn series. So every other month or so is a 1 hour sponsored Lunch and Learn. This afternoon session that starts at lunchtime for some people at noon is to help educate the bar and conservators, not necessarily lawyers, about the Bill of Rights for nursing home residents. So there'll be a series of conversations. They qualify for educational credit for lawyers who have mandatory requirements in that regard, but they are open to non-lawyers. And so I think as those dialogues and those training opportunities expand across our state through various entities, we're increasing awareness as well. The Connecticut Bar Foundation is also sponsoring a series on conservatorships, where we've been, where we are now, and where we should go. The kickoff event was just held last week, and I would encourage all of you to go to the Connecticut Bar Foundation website as that series of conservatorship dialogue continues into 2022. So thank you.
Very good, thank you. So thank you again for appearing before us, and thank you again to Jim Politis for his liaison work. And if anything else occurs to you, we have an open record, so we're happy to take any other submissions, any referrals, other speakers you think maybe should hear from, any other resources you think that we may have. And for the members, we're going to be updating our resources document very soon to include some of the new things and contributions by our other members. So I just wanted to be sure to say that. Before we wrap up, as we have about 10 more minutes, I want to just open up once again to anyone else who may have a reflection they'd like to make. And otherwise, I'll kick it to Joan too for a comment or two if you have any. Anyone else? Matt.
It's really, if we're moving to a discussion broadly, after we hear from Joan, I just wanted to get a little information about the public hearing that Joan announced earlier. I wasn't aware that we were having a public hearing, but I do think that's an outstanding idea. And so I wanted to get a sense of the call for the public hearing, and how was it going to be announced, and how is it going to be staffed? You never really know, I guess, with public hearings whether you have 10 speakers or 100. But in part, the question to that, or the answer to that question, is kind of informed on how it's called and how the call is distributed.
That's a good question, and I think that what we're going to do is we may follow up by email about that as far as the process. So we do have that on the calendar. I am still hoping to have the Ombudsman herself come. Maybe that can be some sort of hybrid model. I'm not sure, but we can open it up. We have Joe, who has experience doing public hearings too, and I think we would still probably have the same time limit. We might put, like a 3-minute cap or something before questions. Joe, would you like to comment?
Yeah, typically, during session, committee public hearings allow 3 minutes per speaker, and we set it up as a Zoom webinar so people can sign up on a specific website, which we would have all the details. So I imagine we'd run it in a similar fashion, but it's about 3 minutes per person, and they have to sign up at least 24 hours in advance.
Any other comments or reflections? Okay.
I had one comment back to what Judge Beverly brought up. And we talked a little bit about having the elder bar helping with the checklist or with some sort of training for Medicaid planning. But I think in terms of the overall fraud that's out there in the community, the professionals who should be involved in helping with that training should include social workers or geriatric care managers, people who can look at the what's happening to the person, because a lawyer is not necessarily going to be able to see that. I think there's other professionals who have a better idea of what's going on behind the scenes when they meet with people. So I think it's a really helpful thing for us to come up in our report with suggesting some sort of training for the overall senior fraud, but I'd like to maybe explore what other professionals we would recommend that be included in that.
I totally agree, Joan. I think it's a fabulous idea, something I'm very supportive of. And okay, Michelle has a comment. So I'm going to have some final remarks briefly after Michelle. Go on, Michelle.
Sure. I just wanted to mention, am I on mute? Okay. Locally here in Fairfield County, we have the Center for Elder Abuse Prevention, and they've been fantastic at doing a lot of trainings and speakings for individuals. I believe someone that works there is actually a state representative, and Marie Ellen, you probably know as well. But I thought they might be a great speaker. I don't know how much they know on financial abuse, but they are available to us all the time. And they work very closely with the police departments.
It's Representative Ann Hughes.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think that's great. And maybe that can kind of coincide with our public hearing if we say, instead of, because we don't have so much time, maybe we can invite some speakers to come to the public hearing, for example, from the Center of Elder Abuse and Prevention. And maybe they can submit something in writing. If January 6th is too close, there's a little bit of a window after that they can do that, but maybe they can come and speak. So I'll ask the members, for folks who are kind of in your orbit that you think might be good folks to come for kind of a short and sweet presentation or public hearing testimony, that would be great. And that could help fill up that programming in a nice, diverse way. Anyone else? Okay. So what a wonderful meeting. Thank you very much to our guest speakers. I thought it was really great. We're kind of moving towards the same page of understanding about this growing need. I'm very supportive of a lot of these concepts we've been talking about. I love the checklist idea. I love this concept of kind of having greater interaction between the elder bar and our state as far as services, as far as maybe developing referral lists or something like that for appropriate needs, for language experiences and things like that. And expanding clinics for the Medicaid application process, like we said before, the Bill of Rights. So I think that I really appreciate all of the contributions and some of these new areas of opportunities that we uncovered today. And we'll look forward to having some broad proposals. And in the meantime, thank you all again for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you in the new year. And then I will kick it to Joan now for closing remarks. Thank you all.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I agree with Michael. I think it was a really good meeting. We got to expand a little bit what our focus is. And I think we're headed in the right direction in terms of formulating a good report for the legislature. So we will regroup, Joe and Michael and I, to get some information out to everybody about how that public hearing is going to work. And like Michael mentioned, if anybody has particular professionals or community members or anybody who you think might want to participate in that public hearing, let us know. And then we can come up with a good agenda, because we will have the meeting from 10 to 12. If we have 0 public people from the public signing up, then we'll need some other other things to talk about. But it'll be a good time for us to kind of come together for all of the ideas that have been floating around the last few weeks. So everybody have a happy holiday and happy new year.